Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick are at it again. Not only are the two sides apparently on opposite sides, the last time, Aaron, that I remember these two really going at it was privately over one Tom Brady and Jimmy Garoppolo and who the sides wanted to keep. And ultimately, Robert Kraft says, we're keeping Tom Brady. So Jimmy Garoppolo, you're going to be sent to the San Francisco 49ers. There was no heir apparent at that time for New England. So Robert Kraft wins that one. Bill Belichick ends up leaving as the Patriots coach. We now know he's the head coach at North Carolina. But these two apparently have a different sort of view in their history of how things went down with the Patriots and really how things started with the New England Patriots.
It is the story that just will not die. And I know this is going to be a theme over the next 15, 20 minutes as we discuss this conversation. But I will say this, is that the thing that I guess annoying is the right word. I find this story to be a little bit boring and annoying. Not that I don't think we should be talking about it. I'm the one that kind of mentioned it to you this morning. But the thing about the Patriots dynasty is it's over. Brady's gone. Belichick's gone. Gronk's gone. Edelman's gone. Brewski's gone. Vrabel was gone. I guess he's technically back. The only person that is still there from the glory days is Robert Kraft. But that era of Patriots football is over. And so no matter whose side you're on, Belichick, Brady, Kraft, Belichick had nothing to do with it. Belichick was the whole thing. Your opinion isn't going to change because there is no new info, but we got two old guys. Have you ever seen that video of the two like CFL football players that haven't seen each other in years and they start fighting in the retirement home and they're like swinging their canes at each other? That's what this is. There's nothing that can change anyone's opinion on what happened with the Patriots, no matter how many times Robert Kraft talks about it, no matter how many times Bill Belichick responds. And that's the fascinating part to me, is that on July 16th of 2025, what is this now? 5 full years after Tom Brady left New England, Belichick released a statement in mid-July to talk about it. It's wild to me that these two guys care so much about this thing all these years later.
Well, that's because Robert Kraft was on the Dudes on Dudes podcast hosted by Gronk and Julian Edelman and said, this is Kraft's revisionist history. I'll give you a setup of how Belichick ended up responding. But what Kraft said was that in 1999, when he hired Bill Belichick, he was the one that took the biggest risk. We have the audio from it. Let's hear it. Better than me. Let's hear from Robert Kraft.
I think getting Bill Belichick to come to the Patriots in 1999 was a big risk, and I got hammered in the Boston media, but I think he was with us for 24 years, and we did okay.
So, Robert Kraft,
we did okay.
Explaining his reasoning on how he was the risk taker that started the Patriots dynasty. There is no debating that the Patriots took a different turn with Robert Kraft as their owner. Mm-hmm. But what an interesting sort of, domino effect, because when Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, and Robert Kraft were together, they were winning Super Bowls. They were playing in Super Bowls. They were a perennial contender year in and year out, and the best dynasty that we've seen in National Football League history. So then Brady leaves, and guess what? The Patriots are kind of mid before ultimately just falling flat. Then Belichick leaves, and they've still been, after another year with Gerard Mayo as their head coach, completely flat. So now you've subtracted Belichick, and the team took a downward spiral. And so now Robert Kraft is the only one there. This is where I think Robert Kraft is. We'll get to Belichick's part. This is why I think Robert Kraft is saying this. Number one, because he's the only one left. Mm-hmm. And so you think to yourself, well, then, okay, well, Robert Kraft had nothing to do with this. This is all Brady and Belichick. I also think Robert Kraft wants to go into the Hall of Fame.
Sure.
And at some point, he's been up for consideration as well. We've seen owners in there. And he probably wants to go in, as morbid as this sounds, before he dies. He wants that honor. So now, if no one's going to toot your horn and tell you what you've done, why don't you do it if you're Robert Kraft?
That's an important point because, the one guy that gets, at least in my opinion, maybe you disagree, that gets, it's a question of Belichick, Brady, Belichick. And depending on what point we had this conversation in the last 20 years, there's a different percentage for different guys, right? At certain points, it was more Belichick, then it was more Brady, then it was more Belichick, then Brady leaves, he wins the Super Bowl. Now, I think most people would agree that it was more Belichick than Brady, or more Brady than Belichick. The guy that never gets talked about is Robert Kraft. And, he was the only one there besides those two for all of that entire era. And I do think he deserves some credit, kind of stayed out of the way. He probably deserves actually a lot of credit because he wasn't a helicopter owner. He wasn't, Matt Ishbia or somebody demanding to be involved or wanting to be involved or being overly involved. He let the football people do the football stuff. He let the players play. But that's probably part of it too, is like, he's probably like, hey, it wasn't just these two guys. I have been involved from day one as well. So maybe that's why he wants to be involved or he's tooting his own horn.
I'm sure he feels left out.
Yes.
But Belichick, especially when the Apple TV documentary came out, felt that he was completely thrown under the bus by it. So Belichick, who didn't say much to reporters throughout his career, now is feeling like he has to defend his honor in response to what you just heard from Robert Kraft. The funny thing is on the Kraft side of things, like, I truly don't know, and I was thinking back in time trying to think of different ownership groups that I felt were instrumental in them winning championships. And I can only think of the one that I thought was Dr. Jerry Buss.
Yes, fair.
In relation to what the Lakers were. But it's also of Dr. Jerry Buss providing an atmosphere and doing so in a spot to get the best players, to always get the superstar, and then bring in other big names around him. Now, I don't remember anything offhand in the National Football League. Jerry Jones, we know.
It's the exact opposite with Jerry Jones. Doesn't feel like he got enough credit.
I think that the Steelers dynasty wasn't Rooney based, even though it's always been Rooney ownership. Like, it's a legacy. It's within the family, but we just rarely have owners getting credit for their championships and their titles. And for some reason, Robert Kraft wants that recognition.
Yeah, no, and that is an interesting point of, I'm just trying to think here off the top of my head. The other one too, the Hunt family. It's not like the Hunt family. People were like, well, as good as Mahomes is, who doesn't get enough credit for it? Clark Hunt. So I do think it's interesting. By the way,
Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Clark Hunt.
I know they didn't really do anything for 30 years before Reid got there, but don't forget about Clark Hunt. Let me tell you about him. What was I going to say? But then the Belichick response as well. I don't know if we want to get into that element of it.
Let's do it. Yeah. Let's do it. So this was in a statement that Belichick responded to ESPN when asked about it. Belichick says that he was the one that basically took the big risk. Here's the statement, quote, "As I told Robert multiple times through the years, I took a big risk by taking the New England Patriots head coaching job. I already had an opportunity to be the head coach of the New York Jets, but the ownership situation was unstable. I had been warned by multiple previous Patriots coaches, as well as other members of the media and NFL organizations, that the New England job was going to come with many internal obstacles. I made it clear that we would have to change the way the team was managed to regain the previously attained success." That part of the statement that Bill Belichick made about taking the job in New England.
Can I say something that's the least controversial thing ever, is that they both took risks and they are both partly responsible, I wouldn't say equally responsible, in the success of that dynasty. They did take risks, because what's the argument about Belichick? What has he won without Brady? I know he made the playoffs with the Cleveland Browns, but wasn't the greatest coach that ever lived until he had Tom Brady. But he's also right in that he had another job with the New York Jets and actively chose to not take that job to come to be the New England Patriots head coach. So it's just, I guess the thing, I think it is interesting how I think both these guys, to your point, not only Robert Kraft, being at the end of his life wanting to get into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but obviously Belichick, in his what we assume final chapter at North Carolina, kind of wanting to rewrite his history as well. I guess just the thing that I do keep coming back to is I just don't know that no matter what either of them says, it's going to change anyone's opinion. If you believe Brady was 95% of the reason, there's nothing Belichick's going to say, nothing Kraft is going to say. If you think it's more 50-50, that's fine. But I don't think there's anything that's going to change anyone's opinion at this point.
I have loved Bill Belichick talking about football.
Yeah.
And I felt that when he did the NFL 100 thing where I think he was nominated for an Emmy at that point, it was really, really good. And I think that Bill Belichick loves to talk about football, and Bill Belichick can be a funny guy. Didn't he wear a Navy outfit like at the Army-Navy game when it was played at Foxborough, I think, or something where he dressed up in his old Navy gear to like there is a part of Belichick that is the guy that we don't know in the press that we saw for so many years. So there is a different sort of guy. I think lately with his relationship with Jordan Hudson, it's really altered people's thinking of who Belichick is. But I feel at heart Belichick is actually someone who just loves football and is kind of a funny guy. You just don't realize it. I think we all have those people in your lives. You're like, you know what? That person is very funny, very witty. We know that Belichick knows everything that there is about football, but you don't know that personality, and I think that's there with Belichick. But again, like I said with the Apple TV thing, like I said with the argument of Brady, and it sure didn't help Belichick's argument when Brady goes and wins the Super Bowl with Tampa Bay. No one's taking up for Bill Belichick.
True.
No one is going to bat for Bill Belichick, not even the guy that hired him in the late 1990s, and now that guy is saying that he's the one that took the risk. The only reason that Bill Belichick ended up being on Robert Kraft's, I guess, short list and bringing him in was because of his experience that he had with Bill Parcells when they were together winning or going to a Super Bowl in the mid-1990s. So that's where I think it's unfair to Belichick to say, and Belichick did leave the Jets, and how the Jets situation went down with Bill Parcells, that was all kind of a mess that Belichick was caught up in as well. But this revisionist history of looking back at who took the risk and who did this and who did that, it falls on a lot of deaf ears. That's why I think that you're saying this is kind of a non-story as well, because the Patriots dynasty is what it is. And I don't know how many people care who takes credit for getting the thing started, whether it be Kraft or Bill Belichick.
Yeah, this is a story that is very clearly deeply personal to these two individuals. Is it a story to anybody? I mean, listen, the Brady versus Belichick angle to it will be a sports talk debate that withstands the test of time, right? But this idea that Kraft either didn't get enough credit or we're trying to diminish Belichick, it just feels extremely personal. It's why during the Tom Brady roast, everything flew up until it was time for Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick to take a shot together. That was it. Think about all the things that they said about Tom Brady during that Tom Brady roast, including about his now ex-wife. None of it seemed to cross a line, and the only time that it got weird was when Belichick and Kraft were asked to take a shot together. I'm just picturing it in my head right now as we speak. And so I just think that it is something that is very clearly deeply personal to both of them. They do not like each other. I just think that while it's very interesting to them, it's two big names, it's one of the great runs in the history of sports that we've ever seen, I just don't know why we as consumers are supposed to care, because, again, there's no new chapters to it. It'd be like me and you today. This is what it'd be like. It'd be like Peyton Manning releasing a statement on why he doesn't get enough credit for his role in the Manning versus Brady rivalry. You'd be like, well, who cares? It's over. It's been over. And it's just, I don't know. I understand why both guys are passionate about protecting their legacy. I just don't know why it was a lead story on ESPN today, because I don't know why we as consumers are supposed to care, and I certainly don't think there's anything new to the story that should drag us back in.
I think Belichick speaking and saying what he's saying, especially after the 60 Minutes debacle of what he's allowed to say, is interesting. I also honestly just think it's really crappy of Robert Kraft to say something about Bill Belichick. What was more in the podcast was he said, I gave up a number 1 draft pick for a coach that had only won a little over 40% of his games to get him out.
Yeah.
It's a really crappy thing
It
to
is.
do, to say, especially because I think we all look back at the 40%. We look at Bill Belichick's tenure in Cleveland as one of great success because he had the Browns as a playoff team. And because the team ended up being then sold moving, I should say, like the tenure ended abruptly, but you can't say that he didn't have success there. So for him to go and use that against Bill Belichick, again, after knowing everything about him from their time together in New England, I just think it's a really crappy thing for Robert Kraft to do. And what makes it worse is that it sure seems that Robert Kraft is trying to say that stuff to prop himself up. So Belichick has nothing else but to actually defend his name, because it sure doesn't seem like anybody is rushing to his defense, especially, and this would tick me off as well, if Gronk or Edelman aren't calling Kraft out in terms of what he said. So now you have former players who are, like it or not, inadvertently brought into the mix, and all of a sudden they look like they side with Robert Kraft. So if you're Bill Belichick, like him or not, like, it's a crappy spot to be in, and if nobody else is going to defend him, he might as well defend himself.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm debating if I feel any different about Gronk and Edelman. I mean, they're not journalists.
I think they're innocent, like bystanders, but they get drawn into it because Kraft said it on their podcast, and they didn't necessarily go up and, at least I don't hear any rebuttal to it.
And I'm not. I understand why Belichick would be mad, but it doesn't make any of us think any different about Belichick, right? Like, it's no different than when, LeBron does his podcast with KD and they're making fun of Jordan taking time off to play baseball. It's like, it doesn't make me, they're allowed to have their opinions. It doesn't make me feel different about Jordan, though. And it, again, that was something that was kind of crappy to say about Jordan, but it doesn't make me as a consumer feel different,
We just talked about Wyndham Clark a little while ago, and what Wyndham Clark was doing at the Oakmont locker room. Oakmont didn't have to release a statement. As I said, the U.S. Open that comes around in 2033 is far down the line, but they decided to take a stand because they felt that there was a wrong. That's kind of why I think Belichick could have just let it go off to the ether and been like whatever, but they decided to take a stand, or he decided to take a stand to defend his own honor into what he did. And I just think that the 40%, the 40% win, or the 400 winning percentage is weird. Yeah. It's just kind of passing. Then he's like, but I think we did okay, and it tries to soften it, but it doesn't. Like, I'd be ticked off too if I was Bill Belichick.
Yeah, you've kind of talked me into this a little bit because I think, especially in our business, we're certainly not as high profile as Bill Belichick, but people say stuff about us all the time, and there's some times that I think we all decide to just say, screw it, I don't need to respond to everything. But there are certain things that are said by certain people that you're like, you know what, screw that guy, screw that girl, whatever. I'm not letting that person say anything without me getting my side of the story out and letting you know how I really feel about that person. So I think you've actually talked me into it a little bit of why maybe the statement from Belichick made a little bit more sense.
He's Aaron Torres. I'm Dan Beyer. Final thing, do you think Bill Belichick needs to prove anything at North Carolina?
No, and I'll be very quick on this. And it relates to the Nick Saban story from Greg McElroy earlier this week. I don't think Saban's coming back, but I think Saban coming back would only hurt his legacy unless he leads another school to a national championship. But I don't think his legacy can get any higher. And I think Belichick's almost the opposite. I don't think people really have crazy high expectations for North Carolina. So, like, if he goes 7-5 and 6-6, and in 2 years he's just like, I'm out, I don't think it changes how we feel about Bill Belichick, the head coach. I do think it would change if he has a great deal of success. We're like, oh, he actually was pretty good. And to your point, it wasn't just a thing with Brady, and, he did lead the Browns to the playoffs, and he did have this great 20-year run with the Patriots, and he did lead Carolina to an 11-1 season. Remember when that happened? So I actually think it's the opposite. I think a good season or a good run elevates his legacy. I don't think that anything short of something truly a debacle, like 1-11, whatever, unless that happens, I don't think it hurts his legacy much.
And they're not going to. I think that it could. I agree with you on building it up. I do think that it could hurt him. In a way, I think almost North Carolina may have more of a risk in terms of the fallout. It hasn't been good. Like
You're right.
what's going on in the headlines over these last couple of months and the girlfriend aspect of it. Like, it hasn't been this rosy relationship, and people are wondering, geez, you going to make it to June 1st? Well, he did. He ended up making it that far as their head coach. But then you're wondering, all right, is this just a succession plan and so forth? But I think that I don't think it was a no-brainer by any means, but I actually think that there could be fallout from hiring him, whereas I don't think that North Carolina thought there was when they brought him on.
Yeah, really quickly on that point, I think it's an interesting one because with Belichick, you're going to get kind of the snarky, mean-spirited guy with the media that doesn't really give much access to anybody. But when he was with the Patriots, he's winning so much that it doesn't matter. If he doesn't win at that level, which I think most of us don't think he's going to, then you just kind of got an old, grumpy, mean guy as your head coach without any of the benefits of being maybe the greatest coach of all time.